So thank you for that. Great. So I think we've now got coming up for at least 40 people online, which is great. So I think at this point we will make a start. So welcome everyone. It's my pleasure to be able to welcome you to today's Statistics Cafe on mainstreaming gender in official statistics. I'm Rachel Bevan, so I'm the Director at Statistics Division here at UN ESCAP. So it's my pleasure to be able to welcome everyone here today. So we've got a packed agenda as ever. That's why I was keen that we start on time. So I hope that everyone can hear me okay. We are recording this event, but that's just so that if people want to watch it again afterwards, it's there, but just to let you know that. And also, as we go through the agenda and hear from different speakers, please do put your comments, your questions in the chat bar, and that will help us, particularly towards the end when we have some time for that. But just as we go through the event, to try and make it more interactive, it would be great if you could post your questions and comments in there, please. So today we're looking at the issue of gender equality. We know that gender equality has been increasingly recognised as really essential to the process of sustainable development and for the effectiveness of national development policies and plans and gender statistics and indicators, which play a really critical role in promoting gender equality. Using data and statistics to adequately reflect differences and inequalities in the situation of women and men in all areas of life requires a strategy of mainstreaming gender in all stages of data planning, production, use and analysis. It's not enough, as we used to see in the end in previous times, where we just see kind of gender being added at the end of a project or program and then people kind of scrabbling around for the information. It's really important to mainstream gender at all stages. So in terms of actually when we're planning things, in terms of collecting data, looking at the production and then the use and analysis. We've seen the demand for gender statistics has increased over the years, particularly because of things like the international conventions and the development goals at various levels. Whilst we have the Sustainable Development Goals, which include a standalone goal to promote gender equality, Goal 5, gender has also been integrated across many of the other goals and targets to ensure that we have effective outcomes for women and men in various aspects of development. At the global level, the UN Statistical Commission at its 51st session requested that we adopt and integrate a gender perspective into all the agenda items of the Commission. And this was followed by a similar decision at the regional level in Asia and Pacific, where the Committee on Statistics at its 7th session called for advancing the mainstreaming of gender in its works. So this Statistics Cafe attempts to go beyond this conceptual understanding to actually look at the practical approaches to implementing gender mainstreaming in our day-to-day work. And the Stats Cafe today will provide a live demonstration of the e-learning course on using gender data for analysis, communications and policy making in the context of SDG monitoring and beyond. And this was recently launched by ESCAP, UN Women and SIAP. So I'm very pleased today that as our moderator, we've got Sharita Sarayo from ESCAP Statistics Division, and she's going to take over at this point and introduce the presentations and panelists. So thanks very much, Sharita. Over to you.
Thank you, Rachel, and good day, everyone. Thanks for joining us. And I am Sharita Sarayo from the ESCAP Statistics Division, and it is my pleasure to moderate the Stats Cafe, which, as Rachel mentioned, is bringing together experiences from the region and beyond on actioning gender mainstreaming in official statistics. Now, as we know, many national statistical offices have established gender statistics programs and have even included gender mainstreaming in their national statistical development plans and organizational strategies. Yet, there is inadequate understanding of how such mainstreaming can or should be implemented in the practical sense, both at the institutional level as well as across various thematic areas of statistics. So we have an excellent lineup of speakers for this session today who have several years of experience in mainstreaming gender, either in their national context or through a range of regional and global programs they've been involved in. And we will start with an overview presentation on concepts and approaches. And this will be followed by two country experiences from the region, from the Philippines and from Fiji, on mainstreaming gender at the institutional level, as well as in a priority thematic area. And as we know, mainstreaming gender in statistics also requires sensitization on gender issues, as well as relevant statistical training. So we will end with a presentation to hear perspectives and experiences on mainstreaming gender in statistical training, including the launch of our e-learning materials, which ESCAP has produced together with UN Women and SIAP. So before we begin the session, just a few housekeeping issues. Your microphone and camera will be disabled during the session just to avoid background disturbance, but we invite you to enter your comments and questions in the chat box at any time during the session. We will have a Q&A after all the presentations are done at the end. And this session is being recorded, and the recording of the session together with all the PowerPoints will be made available on the webpage for the Stats Cafe, the link for which will be provided in the chat box. So without further ado, let me now invite our first speaker, Sara Duarte Valero. Sara is the Regional Advisor on Gender Statistics at UN Women's Regional Office for Asia and the Pacific, where she has been managing the regional program on gender statistics for almost 4 years now. She previously worked as statistics specialist at the UN Women headquarters, as well as in the statistics division of the Department of Economic and Social Affairs in New York. So Sara will provide us an overview on how we can move beyond concepts to adopt and implement practical approaches in mainstreaming gender in our day-to-day statistical work. So thank you for joining us, Sara. She's actually in a completely different time zone, joining us from the US right now, where I think it's past midnight, actually. So thank you very much for your time, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Sharita, and ESCAP colleagues for having me. Bear with me just 1 second. I'm going to share my screen, which you can hopefully all see now. So as Sharita said, I'm going to talk about mainstreaming gender in official statistics. So let me begin kind of like taking one step back to discuss what we typically mean when we talk about gender statistics and gender indicators, just so that we're all kind of in the same page. So gender statistics are defined as statistics that adequately reflect specificities, differences, and inequalities in the situation of women and men in all areas of life, according to the United Nations. So really, even though a lot of people think of gender statistics as women's statistics, they are statistics about the differences in the lives of women and men and the specific specificities in the lives of women and men. When we talk about gender indicators, again, we tend to think about sex disaggregated data or indicators calling for sex disaggregation, but this is just one small part of gender statistics, of gender indicators, sorry. So gender indicators typically can be classified into indicators that indeed specifically call for disaggregation by sex. So as you see there on the screen, for instance, an example would be labor force participation rate by sex, right? That would be a gender indicator if it says by sex. Another example of gender indicator would be the indicators that specifically refer to an issue that is specific to the lives of women or men. So for instance, maternal mortality ratios, right? Because it's about maternal mortality, it doesn't require sex disaggregation, but it is a women's issue. The same thing would be, I don't know, the prevalence of prostate cancer, right? It's a men's issue, so that would still be a gender indicator. And finally, the third type that we see there on the screen are indicators that do not specifically refer to men or to women, do not call for sex disaggregation, but they still tackle an issue that has gender implications. So for instance, the proportion of population using clean cooking fuels, it doesn't call for sex disaggregation in the official SDG indicators monitoring framework, but we know that it is typically women that spend the most time cooking and within households. So when somebody uses unclean fuels, the household air quality affects women's health disproportionately, and therefore we can assume this is a gender indicator. So hopefully we're all on the same page now regarding what we mean by gender statistics and gender indicators. And we can start talking about mainstreaming versus integrating versus including gender in official statistics. So these three concepts are typically used interchangeably. And although there are no official definitions for the three concepts, at least for us, we understand them in three different ways, right? So we got including gender in official statistics, which is typically what one would do traditionally when we collect population and household census data. So if you look at an old population and household census report, you would see statistics that mostly refer to households, but some statistics that refer to population, individual population, like a population pyramid where you would see data disaggregated by sex and by age, for instance. So there is some integration of gender in the statistics, but the unit of analysis is the household. There is proxy respondent during censuses, so only the head of household is being asked the questions, and therefore the data is simply included, but not really integrated, not really mainstream gender data. So the next step would be when we actually integrate gender data in official statistics. And one example would be a lot of the SDG reports that we see countries producing regularly, where we have, as Rachel said at the beginning, we have a goal 5, which covers gender-specific indicators like, prevalence of violence against women or any of the other gender-specific indicators. We also have, across some of the other goals, some sex disaggregated indicators. And then we have some goals that do not include gender in any way at all. So here we are integrating gender, but not fully mainstreaming gender yet. An example of fully mainstreaming gender, for instance, would be a mixed survey, a multiple indicator cluster survey. So in a mixed survey report, we would see that gender is fully mainstream. The survey has been designed with gender in mind from the beginning. The sampling is designed with gender in mind. The questionnaires are designed with gender in mind. Several members of the same household are being asked different questions to capture all the gender differences. And then the analysis in the report is also drafted to generate gender indicators. So here we see that gender is fully mainstreamed. So this is how, at least how I understand the three concepts. And now we're going to look at the SDG framework as an example to understand how we mainstream gender through the whole statistical process. So as I was saying before, if we look at the SDG framework, we have SDG 5, which is specifically on gender and includes only gender-specific indicators, right? But we also have many other goals where gender is relevant. So in fact, in UNWomen, we would say gender is relevant to achieve every single one of the SDG goals. For instance, you can't eliminate poverty if women remain in poverty, since they make up half of the population. And the same goes for, food security and health and universal education, et cetera, et cetera. Now, the reality is that when we look at the SDG monitoring framework, not all the goals include gender indicators. And therefore, there are some goals that are a little bit, quote unquote, orphan from a gender perspective. And nobody's, typically countries do not monitor these goals from a gender angle just because the framework doesn't include gender indicators. So as you can see there on the slide, many of the goals, for instance, that pertain to the environment are either gender sparse, meaning they include maybe just one gender indicator, or totally gender blind, meaning they don't have any gender indicator. And this is true, for instance, for water and energy and life on land, life on water, etc. So it is a little bit worrisome that in the context of environment, for instance, we know so little about gender because gender is not fully mainstreamed. So now let's look, taking this example of environment, let's look at mainstreaming gender across the whole statistical process and data value chain, really. Let's start first with the very first step of the data value chain, which is the normative frameworks, right? So when we look at whether we have an enabling environment to start producing this gender data. The first step is really identifying, of course, the information needs, but also the indicators that are fit for purpose to generate this gender data over time. So we have a lot of international commitments and related monitoring frameworks that we all use to produce data, like the SDG indicator framework, the Sendai framework, etc. So in the context of environment statistics, besides the SDGs and Sendai, we would also look at the global set of climate change indicators or the global biodiversity framework, system of economic and environmental accounts, etc. None of these frameworks have gender fully mainstream throughout. So in some cases it's integrated, and in some cases it's just, you know, not even integrated. So a few years ago, in partnership with ESCAP, IUCN, and UNEP, UN Women worked to generate a set of gender and environment indicators. So the 4 agencies worked together to look at some indicators that could be useful to countries that wanted to look at this gender and environment nexus in mainstream gender and environment statistics. We came up with a set of priority areas. So we grouped the indicators in priority areas, and you can see those on the screen: land and biodiversity, natural resources, climate change and disasters, etc. And then we had several consultations with experts and member states who came back to us and told us, this is great, this is very useful for all of us to start monitoring, to start mainstreaming gender and environment statistics. But there is a number of gap areas that you still need to look at, and you need to find new indicators for those areas. And those are the areas that you see there on the right, like women and environmental conservation, or like environmental related migration, conflict, violence, etc. So we now have a set of indicators that we recommend, but it's a bit of a living document where we still make additions based on the different changes in needs. And countries have started using these indicators to collect data now. The next step in the statistical process would be really, once we know the indicators that we want to generate, to start producing the data. And before jumping into collecting the data, we can look at some of the data that we may already have and reprocess it to generate gender data. So one example is included here on the screen. We did this a few months ago for Pacific Island countries, and we pulled data from Pacific energy utility firms to look at whether women were represented in these firms, and whether there was parity or not, and which types of jobs women held. So as you can see on the screen, you know, a lot of the technical jobs, women are very, very underrepresented. So yeah, reprocessing the data can be a very good kind of like quote unquote easier solution to start generating gender data. Another solution could be to actually integrate several existing data sources. So look at, for instance, as you can see here on the screen, we integrated demographic and health survey data with geospatial data. And that way we're able to put together some of these gender indicators and climate-related indicators offered by the geospatial information, and look at the connections between both. So as you can see, the map on the screen actually shows aridity index and prevalence of intimate partner violence, and it shows an inverse correlation, right? The higher the aridity, the higher the prevalence of violence. So this is true if we look further across many other indicators. We also see similar connections across the region. So for child marriage, for adolescent births, etc. And then a bigger step in collecting this data would be to actually go ahead and run a survey, for instance. So again, in partnership with many UN colleagues, including ESCAP, of course, we put together a model questionnaire on gender and the environment that includes 10 modules that can help countries generate this data on gender and the environment. Why is gender, so this model questionnaire has gender fully mainstreamed. Why is gender mainstream? Because really gender was taken into consideration from the beginning, from the design stages of this questionnaire. First, we ask questions that are relevant to generate gender measures. But also the sampling considers gender, right? 2 adults in each household are interviewed of opposite sexes. The survey operations are also gender sensitive. So for certain modules that are a little bit more sensitive, we encourage sex matching between the enumerator and the respondents. Enumerators receive training on gender sensitivities before going ahead and collecting this data. And dialogues between gender experts and various parts of government typically precedes the data collection and identification of information needs at the country level. So gender is really fully mainstream in this process. And then finally, once we have...
Sorry, you may need to wrap up quickly. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so once we have the data, we basically the last 2 steps are analyzing the data, which again can be done from a gender angle by generating not only aggregates but also sex aggregated data and looking at correlations like you see here, or this is the same thing, or communicating gender data, which is kind of like going one step further rather than just disseminating the data, actually communicating it and keeping gender in mind. So consistently presenting data disaggregated by sex, even when it's not a gender report, for instance, it's important. Presenting women and men's data side by side, so comparison is easy. Not gender stereotypes, for instance, portraying men as doctors and women as nurses is an example, but still being respectful of norms and traditions. So in a country, for instance, where short skirts are not typically used, when you're presenting the data through an infographic, don't use a woman with a short skirt, that sort of thing. And finally, the last step would be to make sure that this gender data is used for policy, programming, and monitoring. So again, a user-producer dialogue, including gender partners, is important to identify information needs, but also making sure that the policy is then evidence-based, informed by gender data, and monitored by gender indicators. I'll stop here. I'm so sorry to go over time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for that overview. You've really set the scene here for the Stats Cafe. Lots of interesting insights and examples there. And Sarah just used a priority thematic area like gender and environment as the connecting thread to basically walk us through some of the practical ways in which we can mainstream gender in the entire range of statistical processes, from production to analysis to communication. So thank you again. Let me now invite our next speaker, Wilma Guillen. Wilma is Assistant National Statistician and the current head of the Social Sector Statistics Service, Sectoral Statistics Office of the Philippine Statistical Authority. She directs and supervises the implementation of household surveys and the use of administrative data and registers, as well as the monitoring of the SDGs in the Philippines. She is currently the chairperson for the PSA Gender and Development Technical Working Group, which facilitates the implementation of gender mainstreaming efforts for the organization. So Wilma will be sharing with us how gender has been systematically mainstreamed throughout the Philippines statistical system. So Wilma, thank you for joining us, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. If I may just can have a feedback if you can see my slides now.
Not as yet.
Okay, is that good? I've shared it already.
Not yet, Wilma.
Oh, how do I do it? Wait. Maybe I have shared it already, Sarah.
All right. Maybe what we can do is we'll do it from our side.
Okay, thank you very much. I will appreciate that.
Just let us know when you want to flip the slide, please. Just say next, and Nasikan will do it. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Sharita. Now I can see the slides. So good afternoon, everyone. Good day to everyone attending this call. Let me share the efforts of the Philippines in mainstreaming gender in official statistics. As we may recall, during the 1995 Fourth UN World Conference on Women, governments around the globe have committed to the concept of gender mainstreaming in the Beijing Platform for Action, a milestone that has paved the way for increasingly growing extensive discussions and focus on achieving gender equality, where women and men equally contribute to and benefit from development. Next slide, please. Even before this milestone, this is the outline of the presentation. I'll give you some introductions, no? Yeah, okay, I can proceed here. So next slide, please. Next slide. No, back one slide. Okay, even before this milestone event, I mean the Beijing Platform for Action in 1995, the Philippines has already recognized the role of women in nation building. A number of laws and legislations were crafted over the years from 1975 to 2002, recognizing the role of women in nation building. Next slide, please. Ensuring fundamental equality before the law of women and men, adoption of the Philippine Development Plan for Women, creation, next slide, of GAD focal points within an agency, sector, or locality. Next slide. And then the issuance of policies and policies on the generation of data support on gender issues. So this is from 1975 to 2002. On the next slide, a much louder or stronger voice came in 2009 with the enactment of the Magna Carta of Women, which mandated all government offices, national and local, to adopt gender mainstreaming and to develop and maintain a GAD database containing GAD information to include gender statistics and age and sex disaggregated data that has been systematically produced or generated, regularly updated to serve as inputs for planning, programming, policy formulation, and the allocation of a minimum of 5% of the total agency budgets for gender-related initiatives. So given all these enabling laws and legislations, next slide, the advocacies and call to actions on mainstreaming gender, the integration of gender equality, and women empowerment in the plans, programs, and projects of government and private institutions, academic, research, and media institutions are relatively easier because of all these enabling laws and legislations. So from the technical perspective, the enactment in 2013 of the Philippine Statistical Act has strengthened and systematically defined the coordination mechanism among stakeholders on data and statistics in general and on gender-related concerns in particular. The Act provided for the reorganization of the Philippine Statistical System, the creation of the Philippine Statistics Authority, and the Philippine Statistical Research and Training Center. On the next slide, please. The PSS is a government-wide system of providing statistical information and services, and it is a decentralized system consisting of a policy-making body, a coordinating body with primary data collection capability, a statistical research and training institute, all executive offices, agencies, instrumentalities of the national and local governments, and government-owned and controlled corporations or GOCCs that are engaged in statistical activities either as their primary functions or as part of their administrative or regulatory functions. On the next slide, we can see the framework of coordination. At the center of the coordination mechanism is the Central Statistics Authority of the Philippine government, which is the Philippine Statistics Authority, and the PSA is composed of the PSA board as the highest policy-making body on statistical matters, offices of sectoral statistics, censuses, technical coordination, among others. Notice in this framework, the interplay of the data producers, which is on the right-hand side, and the data users on the left-hand side, and we have the data suppliers and respondents below. We also have the legislative offices, which are responsible in crafting laws and policies, who would be needing data and statistics in general, including gender-related data. We also have the executive offices, which are users and or producers of data, and they are using data and statistics on gender to craft gender-sensitive programs, plans, and projects. Training, education, and research institutes are crucial partners in the continuous efforts to innovate and enhance existing systems, methodologies, and to also generate interesting products and services through data stories, integrating data with GIS, Data Festival, among others. On the next slide, so the PSA actually coordinates the formulation of the country's version of the National Strategy for the Development of Statistics, which contains a specific chapter, which is Chapter 24 of the current PSDP, a chapter on children and gender and development statistics. So on the next slide, the PSA board, which is, as I have said, it is the highest policy-making body on statistical concerns. The PSA board also prescribes appropriate frameworks for the improvement of statistical coordination and establish mechanisms for statistical coordination at the subnational levels. So the PSA board is on the next slide, is assisted by the interagency committees or IACs in the exercise of its functions. Next slide, please. So there are various committees actually created by the Statistical Act, and one of these committees is the Committee in Gender Statistics, which I have highlighted in red font. And this Committee on Gender Statistics is currently renamed as the IAC on Gender, Children, and Youth Statistics because of the increasing need for data on children and youth, especially with the monitoring of the Sustainable Development Goals. So this committee, like other committees, will coordinate, on the next slide, please, and resolve agency concerns on gender statistics and serve as a forum for discussion of the gender issues raised by concerned producers, users, and other stakeholders of sectoral and agency-specific statistics. So the role of the Committee on Gender Statistics, is really very crucial, and this is currently chaired by the Philippine Commission on Women, or the PCW, and this is vice-chaired by the Central Planning Authority of the country, the NEDA, and also the PSA as another co-chair. And the member agencies are relevant agencies, where also the PSA is serving as the coordinator and the secretariat. On the next slide, the PCW acts as a catalyst for gender mainstreaming. It's the authority on women's concerns and advocacies for women's empowerment, gender equity, and gender equality. So they have a very crucial role, being the head also. That's why they are put as the head of the Interagency Committee on Gender, Children, and Youth Statistics. Now, the latest milestone of this committee, the IAC discussed the matter, I mean, this concern, and recommended to the PSA board, which eventually approved it, is on the next slide, the PSA board resolution number 8, which is the approval and adoption of the updated Philippine Core Gender and Development Goal development indicators. So this has been developed by mapping the different indicator frameworks on women, but we only selected those that which we think are workable within a set timeline. So on the next slide, we can see other coordination mechanisms in the Philippine statistical system. One is the Statistical Survey Review and Clearance System, which reviews and evaluates the design and instruments of statistical surveys that are funded by the government, both at the national and at the local level. The other one importance of the SSRCS is that it will help us in avoiding duplication of statistical undertakings. On the next slide, we have at the subnational level the mechanism for coordination, and these are the regional and provincial statistics committees, which, as with the national interagency committees, is a forum for the discussion and resolution of statistical issues, including gender, children, and youth concerns at the regions and the provinces. On the next slide, you can see here the different advocacy activities in the Philippine statistical system. We have the these advocacies include the National Statistics Month every October. We have the National Convention on Statistics every 3 years. We have the user-producer forums of the different surveys that we do. We have dissemination forums, international conferences, forum with development partners. We also participate in the World Statistics Day, as well as we conduct Women's Month celebration. So if at the international level, it's only a Women's Day, but in the Philippines, we celebrate it on a month-long celebration. And we also have the 18-day campaign to end VOW, or violence against women, from 25 of May to 12 of May. So we can see on the next slide the different outputs, outcomes, and challenges of this coordination mechanism that we have. We have created greater awareness and concerted actions on mainstreaming gender by integrating sex or gender disaggregation in statistical surveys, in censuses, and even in administrative data gathering in the PSS. So as you have seen, the PSS actually is composed of practically all the government agencies in the Philippines. So PSA, as the Central Statistics Authority and the Center of Statistical Coordination, would regularly collect data in the Philippine statistical system, compiles this, and disseminates this in various products. We will see these products later on. But just to mention, the challenge that we are having is the collection of, this one has been sought for several times already, the estimate of unpaid housework, and we were able to integrate some questions in one of the round of the labor force survey, and we are going to study this one. So if we can move to the next slide, please.
Wilma, may I request start wrapping up, please?
Yes, okay. So we are committing to this different the being platform for action and so on. And if we can go to the next slide. Here I can show you the gender-related products as a result of the PSA coordination with other agencies in the Philippine Statistical System. This one on the Women and Men web page. On the next slide would be the Women and Men database. Next slide, please. And then we have the annual, on the next slide, annual fact sheet on women and men. And then next slide would be the National and Regional Statistical Handbook on Women and Men in the Philippines. But we also have on the next slide, the National Statistical Handbook on Women and Men at the national level. We also have on the next slide, the SDG webpage and some gender statistics on labor and employment on the next next page, please. And lastly, we have some next steps. So this is the GSLE. Some next steps on the next slide. We are developing a methodology on measuring unpaid housework. And we are also developing the guidelines on establishing and maintaining gender and development statistical database, as well as we will also be pursuing the accomplishment of statistical development programs as incorporated in the Chapter 24 of the NSDS of the country. That's all. Thank you very much.
Wilma, thanks a lot. Lots of information there, and thanks for sharing the Philippines experience. What we've heard is that coordination mechanisms and advocacy efforts at various levels are really required to successfully adopt and mainstream the gender perspective throughout the statistical process. And beyond institutional structures, I think a very important point that you made is about culture and practices, which we can perhaps call mindset, wherein gender issues become central and an integral dimension in our statistical activities rather than an add-on. So thanks for leaving us with that thought. May I now invite our next speaker, Melly Nadakuka. Melly is statistician at the Vital Statistics, Demography and GIS unit of the Fiji Bureau of Statistics. Melly supervised the last round of the Fiji Multiple Indicator Cluster Survey and is currently the project manager for various projects on vital statistics indicators and assessing completeness and inequalities in the registration of births and deaths. As part of the work done through an ESCAP-led project, Melly will share with us how Fiji has used death registration completeness data to interpret and analyze gender dimensions in civil registration and vital statistics. Melly, thank you for joining us, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Sharida. And also thank you to my fellow panelists for the very informative presentation so far. On behalf of the Acting Chief Executive of the Fiji Bureau of Statistics, we are grateful to the ESCAP team and the ESCAP appointed consultant, the amazing Ms. Renee Sochik, for the invitation to serve as a panelist here for the ESCAP Stats Café on mainstreaming gender in statistics. My topic today will be on identifying and analyzing gender dimensions of civil registrations and vital statistics using death registration data in Fiji. At the Fiji Bureau of Statistics, the gender mainstreaming priorities in statistics that all surveys and census conducted by the Fiji Bureau of Statistics are collected, compiled, analyzed, and disseminated accordingly by sex disaggregated data under the Statistical Act Cap 71 and 72. The Fiji government has endorsed and approved the Fiji National Gender and Policy in 2014. These are policies to promote gender equality in Fiji. In this policy, it recognizes age disaggregated data as a key strategy to achieve its objectives. Also, the Fiji's Country Gender Assessment Report was published in 2015. A report on the same for 2020 has been compiled and review in progress by the Ministry of Women, Children and Poverty Alleviation, together with the Fiji Bureau of Statistics and other relevant stakeholders. Also on death registration. Death registration has gendered aspects. Here in Fiji, women often need a birth, marriage and death certificate to inherit property or claim inheritance from a deceased spouse or receive social benefits such as pensions. Also, the proof of death can provide surviving children with access to social services and benefits, especially important for households headed by single mothers. For unregistered deaths of women and girls affect the ability to prevent similar deaths. In cases if you don't know what women or girls are dying from, where, at what age, you cannot prevent similar future deaths. Therefore, maternal mortality is a good example for this. In addition, the Fiji Bureau of Statistics appreciates the opportunity given by ESCAP in conducting the Fiji Inequality Assessment Project under the 2014 Ministerial Declaration to get everyone in the picture and the associated Regional Action Framework called to assess inequalities related to civil registration vital statistics experienced by subgroups of the population, including among women who are most likely to be left out worldwide. With the support of the UN ESCAP, Fiji is currently implementing a project to assess inequalities in registration of births and deaths, as I mentioned, among different subgroups in the population. This involves assessing death registration completeness by characteristics such as sex, age group, and ethnicity, whereby comparing deaths that are actually registered under the Ministry of Justice and to estimated number of deaths based on the recorded or the occurrence deaths data from the Ministry of Health and Medical Services. Please note for recorded deaths in Fiji from the Ministry of Health and Medical Services, these are used as the best source of estimated deaths due to notification of death from the Ministry of Health and Medical Services is needed for burial and cremation permit, and also review from the 2017 estimated Ministry of Health and Medical Services records was around 96.2% of all deaths. Therefore, in this case, 2018 data that we used was believed to be the most reliable year. In such, we have identified in the initial findings that for death registration completeness by sex and age group for the year 2018, adult male deaths are more likely to be registered compared to adult female deaths. However, male deaths registration completeness decreases after age 75, which can impact inheritance rights and receival of social benefits by surviving spouses. In addition to the initial findings, differentials exist by age, sex, and ethnicity. In this case, and this is illustrated in this graph. As you can see, death registration completeness. Please note that in this registration, it also includes delayed registration by sex, age group, and ethnicity in Fiji in the year 2018. When broken down by ethnicity, you can see differentials in death registration increased with Itoke, that is the native Fijian women having the lowest rates of registration. From these findings, we've identified some potential gender policy for considerations. Such Itokes are more likely to live in the outer islands and remote areas. As such, policies to increase access to registration and ease of registration process should be considered based on differing needs and challenges faced by women and men. Also, to raise awareness about the importance of birth and death registration as a permanent record to trace heritage, lineage, and ancestry, which is highly valued in Itoke culture. For those living in remote areas around here in Fiji, they may not be aware of the requirement to register deceased family members. As such, some policies to be considered consider outreach programs in educating and creating awareness, particularly around the need to register women's deaths and recording causes of their death to prevent such future deaths. Also, to investigate simultaneous issuance of burial order and death certificate. Also, for under registration of Itoke male deaths could adversely impact Itoke women who are entitled to social benefits and inheritance. Consider collaboration with the Provident Fund to proactively contact family of the deceased and educate them about their benefits and the need for death registration. Also, lastly, to raise awareness among women's groups, cultural heritage foundations, and etc. Here at the Fiji Bureau of Statistics, the next steps for us is to further disaggregate data to lower geographical levels. For example, district, community levels by sex at the most vulnerable groups in terms of age and registration challenges. Consider focus groups or other types of research to understand from families why they are more likely to register men's death compared to a woman, and in which we use this information to inform more targeted policies to improve death registration among women. Also, to investigate partnerships between government ministries to improve the outreach and awareness to improve death registration completeness, particularly with the Provident Fund, with outreach to surviving female spouses. Thank you very much. Naka. Back over to you, Sharita.
Thank you so much, Melly. Thanks. That was an interesting example of analyzing existing data using a gender perspective, something that Sarah talked about in her first presentation as well. So here, findings from death registration completeness data disaggregated by characteristics such as sex, age, and ethnicity are being used to inform a range of potential gender policies across health, economic empowerment, women's rights, as well as family-related policies. So thanks for that very interesting work, Melly. Last but not the least, may I now invite our colleagues from the Statistical Institute for Asia and the Pacific, Zenobia Muni and Christophe Bonton. Zenobia is statistician and lecturer at the Institute in the areas of social and demographic statistics. She has been involved for over 15 years in coordinating statistical development activities and supporting the implementation of multi-year technical cooperation projects, both in the Caribbean and the Asia-Pacific regions. Christophe is also a statistician and lecturer at the Institute, specialized in big data, machine learning, and data visualization. He has over 2 decades of experience in teaching and as a researcher on environment and food economics. So Zenobia is going to share with us her insights on planning and designing statistical training using a gender perspective, and Christophe will provide us a live demonstration of the e-learning course on using gender data for analysis, communications, and policymaking in the context of SDG monitoring and beyond, which was recently launched by ESCAP together with UN Women and SIAP. So thanks both Zenobia and Christophe for joining us. Also, they are in completely different time zones right now. Zenobia is joining us all the way from the Caribbean and Christophe from France, so very late, very early Thank you very much, and over to you.
Thank you, Sharita, for introducing us and inviting us to this Stats Cafe to speak on the topic of gender mainstreaming. I'm going to now share my screen. Just let me know if you can see it.
Not as yet, Sinovi. Okay, it's loading. Okay, that's fine. You just need to put it into present mode. Okay, that's great. Thank you.
Okay. So I don't think I'm on the first slide. There we go. All right. So Sarah already touched on and explained very clearly what gender mainstreaming is. But just for the purposes of our presentation, I will also touch on two key points. The first one being that gender mainstreaming is in itself a strategy and a means to an end. The end being gender equality. And the second point is to understand that mainstreaming gender entails taking into consideration both men and women's concerns and experiences as integral dimensions in the design, implementation, monitoring, and evaluation of our programs, with statistical training programs being no exception. And the definition I have on the screen is from the ECOSOC resolution of 1997. Now, of course, there are several reasons for mainstreaming gender in statistical training, and some of them we've already heard from our previous speakers. So at a minimum, ensuring that equal opportunities for both men and women, that they are provided with those opportunities to participate and benefit from training and development on the one hand, while also ensuring that a gender lens is always applied across all statistical training activities. Ultimately, the goal is to contribute to the achievement of the global goal of gender equality. Now, as it relates to gender mainstreaming in terms of statistical activities, we have to understand first that it cannot be achieved through an ad hoc or arbitrary process. And to pursue, it must be pursued, and there must be enabling conditions that are both sufficient and necessary. And the first one is it requires an explicit institutional framework or policy, which is supported by institutional commitment or a plan to implement, monitor, and assess mainstreaming. And the framework basically formalizes the gender mainstreaming processes. It ensures that the relevant goals, milestones, targets, and resources are part of the organization's mandate and clearly identify how gender equality issues will be addressed in the core activities of the organization. The second key enabling condition relates to implementation, and mainstreaming has to be linked to the core activities, as I said previously, and must be carried out by the staff at an individual level. So the second enabling condition is equipping staff at all levels within the institution with the tools and the knowledge that will help them support the gender mainstreaming function. And by way of an example, within the United Nations system, there is a system-wide policy, action plan for mainstreaming gender, and that has been translated into agency-wide, agency-specific gender mainstreaming policies and implementation plans. In addition, one of the core values of the organization is promoting gender equality. And this core value basically sets out the principles and beliefs and behaviors that UN staff are to uphold in the discharge of their duties. So that's by way of example of how what is essential to gender mainstreaming. In addition, when it comes to statistical training, gender mainstreaming can be achieved in several ways. The first one has to do with integrating a gender perspective into the substantive content of the statistical training program. So it begins with firstly developing and conducting capacity building activities that give an appreciation of how we mainstream gender as a process within designing statistical activities, collecting and disseminating unbiased gender statistics that adequately reflect the differences and inequalities in the situation of women and men. In other words, gender statistics then becomes an enabling tool for gender equality. But that also extends beyond that. The content of the training should also include applying a gender lens to all trainings across the various domains of statistics. So also integrating it into environment, and I think Sarah already pointed out two examples of that, social, disaster-related statistics, as well as demographic statistics. So basically not thinking of gender in silos, but integrating it across all of the domains. So for example, recognizing that crime and disasters, for example, affect men and women differently, capacity building on crime and disaster-related statistics should also incorporate gender perspective in those trainings. In addition, we've already touched on the SDG framework and the importance of gender as a cross-cutting issue. So developing training activities that specifically support the production of official statistics for measuring all of the SDG indicators that have a gender as a cross-cutting issue, but also specifically indicators related to SDG 5 on the gender, which seeks to gender equality. The second approach, in addition to that, part of the training should also include the use of facilitators who are equipped to deliver the training. So it may, in some cases, require looking for support from experts within specialized agencies, for example, UN Women, who can deal with the gender issues more concretely. The second core approach for mainstreaming gender in statistical training entails taking into account the gender considerations when designing and organizing trainings. So for instance, we have to ensure that we facilitate access to training programs and ensure that there's equal access for both men and women in the training programs, allocating relevant resources, as well as identifying barriers, if they exist, to participation and ensuring that those are addressed. In addition, in the design of the training, we need to look at the design of the pedagogical or instructional materials to ensure that they do not perpetuate gender inequalities and that the illustrations, images, and examples are all gender sensitive. The third aspect relates to communicating the gender dimensions in the reports and analysis. And we've already touched on some of those. The most basic one being collecting and producing sex disaggregated statistics and presenting men and women separately, statistics on men and women separately to unearth inequalities. It also extends to analyzing the data using a gendered analysis or gendered lens to identify both the obvious and not so obvious gender equality issues and gaps, and to ensure that those are diagnosed. Now, one example, sorry, just by way of, just to explain the illustration here, one way in which we can communicate that in terms of gender training is by including sex ratios and basically showing here the number of men relative to women. And this basically illustrates the sex ratios for several of the categories of training offered by SIAP. And of course, as you know, SIAP has a long history of organizing and implementing statistical training activities. And as part of the approach for ensuring sustainability in training activities focused on gender, there was the establishment of a subgroup on gender statistics in 2018 with a mandate for supporting training activities in gender statistics in Asia and the Pacific and targeting both users and producers. UN Women is the secretariat for this subgroup. One of the outcomes of the subgroup has been the development of a gender statistics training curriculum, which is designed to guide trainers on how to conduct training in gender statistics. And the curriculum contains 11 modules, and it is appropriate for both seasoned statisticians and experts, as well as policymakers and anyone who is interested in gender statistics. So today we are going to introduce the self-paced course designed by ESCAP, both with SIAP and input from SIAP and the Statistics Division, as well as UN Women, that is based on the gender statistics training curriculum. And by self-paced, we mean that a learner who is interested in the course can pursue it through the SIAP learning management system, and they're allowed to set their own schedule and deadlines for completing the course and managing the content at their own pace. The objectives really are listed here. One, to gain technical knowledge on gender statistics. These are the broad learning objectives for anyone interested in this course. Acquiring an in-depth understanding of the challenges and opportunities for working with different types of data sources and the compilation of SDG gender related indicators, as well as building capacity in statistical literacy and communication. In the other elements of this self-paced course include that it has 10 interactive modules, 6 of which are mandatory, that the learners who can think about pursuing this course can be both experts and non-experts. The course also has several exercises and integrated quizzes, and one of the expectations is that one of the mandatory activities is that learners must complete a final test and provide feedback through an evaluation. And on that test, they must get a minimum score of 70%. So at this time, I have the pleasure of handing you over to Christophe, who's going to take you through a live demonstration of this course.
Thank you, Sinovia, and good day, everybody. While I'm sharing my screen, and you will see in a minute the flyer that will be shared with everybody and that has circulated already, I would like to take this opportunity to thank all of those who have contributed to this course. So Sinovia, Sarah, Sharita, Petra, Sneha, Pampaka, Pim, Ross, Nicola, and Yunku. All of these people have contributed, so thank you all. So there are several ways to access to the course. The first one could be directly by connecting to the SIAP e-learning platform, but maybe the shortest way is to use this flyer that will circulate. And here you have some information and a direct link to the course. So if you see, I will enlarge. If you click directly on this link, which I will do right now, you will be connected to the SIAP e-learning platform, and you recognize here the picture of the course Sinovia already has shown. And you can directly connect to the course here by self-enrolling yourself. So if, as me, you already have an account on the SIAP, you can just log in. If you do not have an account on the SIAP yet, you can quickly create one account by filling this form, which is very classical. Just pay attention that this is a two-step procedure. It means that once you have filled this, you will receive an email with a clickable link to validate your registration. Be careful that this email may end up in your spam folder. So since I'm already enrolled at the SIAP, obviously, here I will log in as a student, as you will do, and connect to the course directly. So here is the course. You have several modules here, and as I have completed almost all of the modules in this course, I would be able to present you all the modules. But the modules are presented in a sequential way. Basically, you need to have validated, completed one module to be able to see the next one. This is obviously for pedagogical reasons, as we will go through the course sequentially and have maybe information that relates one to each other. One information that you may start by looking at is the course overview, a document where you have all the information concerning the course, the learning outcome, the design, and the interactive lessons. Sinovia mentioned that there are some optional modules which are marked here with a star. You have all the information here, as well as the certification and the course feedback that is mandatory to get the certification. I will come back to that in a minute. So let's go back to the course. Here you have all the section of the course. So you see the 10 modules. You have different modules. As we mentioned, some of these modules are a little bit technical and are not mandatory to receive a certificate, so you have a star for them. The final exam will appear only, as if it is in my case, if you have completed all the mandatory modules and if you are ready to take it, because it's a self-paced course. You really can do that at your own pace. This is something important. I will show you that in a minute, but within each module, within each lesson, you have some short quizzes that are not graded. They are just here to help you remember key points and to self-test your comprehension and your knowledge assimilation. So maybe you are quite eager to see what's inside the course and how these lessons present. So in order not to spoil, I will start with the introduction and I will return where I left. So if I click here, Introduction to Gender Statistics, I will enter into this course. One of the features of the SIAP e-learning platform is that you can return to where you left off. So if at some point you did not finish a lesson, that's not a problem because some lesson may be longer than other. So I will resume to where I left. So you cannot hear, but there is a voiceover on this slide here, and you have several information that will be displayed as the voiceover is talking to you. You have here all the structure of this particular lesson. You see that it's very well structured. You have animation, it's interactive. There are some questions about what you just have seen or about some elements that are really important when you want to use, for example, the example of gender-specific indicators. You have to select which apply, and once you submit, I will do something maybe that is not relevant randomly. You will have some feedback on what you have done.
Christoph, could you please start wrapping up?
Yeah, one other important thing is the fact that you have a transcript here of what is said when you have a slide with some elements. So you can see the transcript, as well as some resources with some links. So yes, as time is flying here, let's return to the course. Just by saying and repeating that it's your own pace, you really can use all the modules and follow the modules. You have, for each module, you have the time, approximate time duration of each module. And I hope you will enjoy that. So to get the certificate of completion, as Sinovia already said, you just need to complete all the mandatory module, get the final exam with a score of 70% or higher, and submit a feedback in order to help improve this course if there is something you want to tell us. So thank you, all of you. On behalf of the team, we wish you a very rewarding learning experience. Over to you, Sharita and Rachel.
Thank you very much, Sinovia and Christoph. And I would just like to echo what Christoph said. We really hope you will be able to access the course and also complete the course. And please do leave us your feedback if you happen to be able to go through all the modules so that we can improve similar courses in the future. So thank you very much, and to all our presenters. And let me now open the floor for questions and discussion. And we have a few questions I see in the chat box. And maybe I will direct the first question to Sarah, where our colleague Tracy asks where and how broader non-binary concepts of gender fit in the UN picture from both an international and also Asia-Pacific perspective. I think there was a second person in the chat who posted a similar question. So Sarah, if you could quickly shed some light on this, please.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for bringing this up. I think it's a very important topic, and indeed we haven't tackled this during the presentation. Part of the reason why is because we don't have internationally agreed statistical standard on this just yet. So there is quite a bit of work that's being done both at the international level and in select countries, but there is no agreement yet to generate comparable statistics on this topic. So I would say the most used solution in a lot of surveys and census would be to add 2 separate questions, one on the sex assigned to the respondent at birth, and the second one on the current sexual orientation of the respondent. And then different countries opt for providing just a couple of responses, you know, male, female, other versus male, female, and a broader range of options, right? So then again, there's no standard just yet. So then different countries kind of differ. But then what we've seen very often is that the countries that have started collecting this information regularly, like for instance, Nepal included related questions in their latest census, and you know, several other countries across the region are doing it. Then they haven't been using the actual disaggregation for the calculation of a lot of the statistics. So we still don't have a clear picture of the differences, you know, in practice across many different indicators. But I think it's work in progress, and slowly we're gonna get there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. May I now invite Wilma and Melly, if you could address the question in the chat box, which basically asks, from your country perspective, what are some of the challenges and successes in getting the valuable evidence and statistics that you're producing you actually used for national policy? So Wilma, would you be able to shed some light on what are some of the challenges? You know, you've talked extensively about the entire institutional setup, the advocacy efforts that you're putting in. But eventually, if the data that is being produced is not used for policy, it's you know, it's a waste of data. So could you shed some light on you know, what are some of the challenges you're actually facing, or perhaps some of the successes in getting this data used for policy? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Sarah. So in the Philippines, actually, we don't find so much of trash data because we collect data that are on demand by policymakers. So every time we run a survey, what we do is conduct a consultative meeting wherein the stakeholders of a particular survey are invited to make comments during the meeting, whether online or on time. When they go back after the meeting, we give them some time also to be able to identify which of those information that we have presented from a previous survey are still useful to them, which ones are no longer useful to them. So because of that process that we do, the consultative process that we do before we run a survey, so we are making sure that when we run the survey, the data are really actually needed by the policymakers and the program planners. So that's it, Sarah. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Wilma. Melly, would you like to shed some light on what are some of the challenges Fiji might be facing? You actually brought up quite a few potential policy issues in your presentation, but to actually have these picked up for policy formulation, do you foresee any challenges in Fiji?
Thank you, Sharita. Sorry, could you please repeat that question?
Sure. Sure. So, Melly, what we were discussing is in your presentation, you highlighted a couple of policy issues, potential gender policy issues, which your data is informing, right? We just wanted to hear what would be some of the potential challenges to actually bringing this data to policy. So, you know, for policymakers to actually pick up the findings and interpret them and use them, what do you see as some of the challenges in Fiji, and how do you think these can be dealt with? Melly, you are muted.
My apologies. Thank you, Sharita. In the case of Fiji, even though we already have the national gender policy in place, there are still quite a few challenges that we are facing in terms of the different government ministries have different processes and procedures in place, which will require more discussions, and MOU is needed to be signed within these government ministries with regards to sex disaggregated data here in Fiji. And also some of the other for us at the NSO probably need more capacity building on analyzing of gender statistics by and terms of analysis. Thank you.
So thank you so much, Melly. We've actually reached the end of our time, the time allocated for the Stats Cafe. So I do not see any other questions at this point in the chat box. But please feel free to send us questions if you have any, even after this session, and we will try to have them answered through our experts here in writing. So once again, I would like to thank all our speakers for this session, for the very insightful presentations. And I would also like to thank all our participants for joining in and for your active participation. So bye for now, and see you at the next Stats Cafe. Thank you so much.